Welcome, everybody. My name is Mikey Mhenna. I'm really happy that you're all here. I'm the executive director of afikra. Butheina Kazim is the founder of Cinema Akil, the only independent art house in the Gulf region, programming repertory cinema programs at their flagship home in El Sirkal Avenue in Dubai, and through the nomadic cinema across the UAE. Kazim is a member of the steering committee of the network of Arab alternative screens, where Cinema Akil is a member. Kazim lives and works in Dubai, and we are very, very honored to welcome to afikra Conversations.
Thank you, Mikey. It's exhilarating to be here and intimidating and incredibly flattering. Thank you.
Yeah, I'm really, really, really excited to have you here. So let's just start the way we typically do with sort of a biographical question. When did you first start, developing a love for cinema, or probably what you called it at the time when you were a kid, movies? When did you first start loving movies?
So I don't have a very romantic, Cinema Paradiso story where I hid behind the projector tower and, and I was always in love with the idea of the movie theater. And I have those nostalgic memories that trigger the kind of decisions I make, with Cinema Akil as a space, as a platform, as a nomadic cinema. But I think what really, drew me to the world of cinema, or the world of the moving image, has always been the concept of, a world of ideas through the language of film, or a world of ideas through the language of the moving image. And that's why, I pursued, a sort of a temporal career in media, thinking that would be the best way to, explore those ideas, and eventually ended up, building an art house space and an actual brick and mortar environment for the sharing of films and, communal experiences of filmic and cinematic storytelling. So it was always about the idea of, experiencing, entering, and, and living a particular reality, narrative, frame of reference through, through video and through film and through, cinema, and through a perspective and through an era, and the idea of time travel and wanderlust and, and multiple, lived experiences. And I think that comes from, a particular curiosity or yearning to, live in multiple places at the same time, or be multiple people at the same time, and, and have these kind of magical, fantastical ideas of, how life can be experienced. So there's kind of a selfish, component to the fascination, with the medium, and the fascination with the idea of cinema as storytelling. So I think that, I can't really trace back an aha moment where I've always been, intrigued by it. But I think, I grew up in Dubai, and, we had, standalone art house cinemas as kind of the de facto cinema experience. So that was something that was always, a treat. It was slightly taboo. It was slightly, exclusive. It was something that, it was always a reward. So there was always this kind of, memory attached to every cinematic experience. So there was always that banked in probably my self-conscious. There was also, I remember, my dad used to travel back and forth from the States. He was working as a financial auditor at the time, and, he would come back. He would go to CompUSA, which is, which would have been saved by, by the, and it would be the discount rack of gigantic laser discs that he would bring back. And it was all these, random selections of films that, that we had access to for, however long that technology lasted. It was like a 2-year period. And those things were precious. They were not vinyls, and they were not DVDs, and they were not, VHSs. And I felt really privileged to, have these in my hands. So I would just, devour them as part of my consciousness, building. But I think that's probably the allure that, and I think to this day, having done this for as long as I have so far, I still can't really, pin it down to anything other than magic, that kind of, really captured, my soul in doing this.
So I was listening to an interview that you gave a few years ago, and you talked about, you studied graphic design in Toronto. That's sort of, and in Canada, you worked in Montreal for a while. And then you came back in 2008, you started working in television, sort of by accident, right? And worked on this ill-fated project called Cine TV. And then after that, were you, did you feel like there was a gap in the market? Was there a thorn in your side that you're like, oh, I wish this existed in Dubai and in the Gulf? And how did you feel about sort of the cinema landscape, or awareness around cinema, or awareness around, capital C cinema at the time?
Yeah, I mean, look, seeing TV is kind of like the reverse, manifestation of this dream of sharing, films from our part of the world, right? So there was this like moment in Dubai where everything seemed possible. I came back in 2000, early 2008, right before the financial crisis. Everything was possible. They were building, the Living Museums project, and a lot of investment in culture. And there was this kind of hype of a moment that we now think of as either static or, or clearly defined, or, evergreen, which was not the case at the time. And I think, I had this very, the naivete of, of a 23-year-old coming to a, a media conglomerate as a graphic designer, having worked, for a year and a half, freelancing on different projects, and, having worked as a graphic designer in a retail consultancy in Montreal, not really having, not feeling the kind of the satisfaction that I was yearning for through everything else that I was doing through that world of graphic design, and proposing to the CEO at the time, that we should have a channel that's doing what Brown Book, Elif, all these publications were doing. Then there was like Portal 9 and all these publications that came after, doing, we got to do this for television. And this was the group that started MTV Arabia, that started Nickelodeon Arabia, and they were trying to, they were working with the Viacom channels to try and invent a particular, appropriated version of Middle Eastern pop culture, or or even specifically like street culture, and whatever their definitions of that look like. So I'm like, this is the perfect place. They have the appetite. There is a curiosity, and there's this new kind of moment that I got to jump onto, of capturing the kind of the pulse of what and the arts and culture space looked like, and what the kind of conversations we were. And I said, we need to have an IFC or a ZDF or an Arte or, a Sundance channel, kind of hybrid that looks at the work that's coming out of our larger region. And that was, that was about a year and a half of doing that. And I, that's when I got into acquisition and programming and, and production and all these different things, at that crazy time. That kind of informed a lot of my, understanding of, how the markets worked. It was mostly acquiring for television, but the basic idea was, create a free-to-air satellite Arabic, Arab television channel that would reach the 360 million people, that would present the Kiarostamis and the Panahis and the Ritwikataks and the documentary, and everything that was coming out at the time. And there was also the Dubai Film Festival that was very at its peak. So there were all these things that that I felt that the kind of the pan-Arab or television space being accessible to everybody and being accessible to every single home around the region could present, and there was an opportunity that I was trying to jump onto. So it was always this kind of need to to get this content to its rightful audiences, and obviously that didn't happen. We raised the funds. It was it was a year of a lot of excitement, and boom, obviously the project got canceled. The conglomerate was liquidated. Everything the rest was history. But I was there with deals of our first deal that we inked was Milhu Hada al-Bahr, or Salt of the Sea, by Anne-Marie Jasser, and we continue to show her films to this day, in Real Palestine and beyond. And I had all of these at the time screeners that you would get from from sales agents and distributors that you would go meet at the markets, and I brought them back and I said, okay, the project is done. I'm not doing that work right now, but I need to get these films out, and I need to make sure people are seeing them. And there were all these, community spaces that were coming up. There was Traffic by Rami Farouk. There was, there was a space called not the Archive, Shelter at the time. That was like a, sort of a co-working, this is like very early on in these experiments. Like now the proliferation of the WeWorks and the, it feels like a different era, but
Yeah.
At the time, there was this one screen, 30 seats, really uncomfortable, that, gave me the space to start programming these. So I would reach out to the, rights holders. I would reach out to Anne-Marie. I would reach out to all these rights holders and ask if we could do public screenings of these films. So that's kind of the early days of, of where that came from. And it was all about kind of sharing these, images and representations and stories and works and, and perspectives to any audience that I could get to. So I was kind of like a, door-to-door salesperson.
Yeah. Okay, so I want to harp on something a little bit that you're sort of getting to, and it's related to this quote I have on the screen for those who can't see the screen, where it's a quote of yours. You say, speaking about the cinema, we want to be a reflection of the country that we're a part of, and the way we think about programming allows people to come together in a different way than they would in a regular multiplex cinema. So what I want to sort of dissect a little bit is what's different about this organization that you're building is that it's bottom up, right? And it's about communing, and it's about getting together in a space, even if they're like pop-ups, grassroots, pop the trunk, let's figure this out, right? As opposed to broadcasting to 360 million people, right? Very, very, very top down. Was the swing hard in that direction, very intentional, or were you like, all right, that didn't work, let's try something else? Or was it a philosophical choice of, okay, top down might not work to make the change that I want to see, let me try bottom up? Or was it not a philosophical change? It was just sort of like, all right, that didn't work, let me try something else.
I mean, it wasn't like there was a reflective period of, but the philosophy always followed, right? Or the philosophy always kind of, existed in chasing the community and reflecting the community. And, that evolved over time, through my engagement with the films and through my engagement with the community, and a better understanding of how the dynamics of, of theatrical exhibition worked, of grassroots organizing worked, of community spaces worked, and what people were really looking for. So, ultimately it became about, and that's why it took us so long to actually open a brick and mortar space, because it was about trying to disrupt the formality or disrupt the kind of the hierarchy of how, cultural institutional creation is done here, and who gets left behind in that process, and that's something that, was always ingrained in what we were doing. So part of it was like, trying to get the word out, about the work that we're doing and the name, and, and what kind of films we are about, and, what kind of experiences we're trying to, and I've become allergic to that idea of even creating experiences, but, what kind of moments we are yearning for, and we're addressing for our, our needs as a community. And I think that was something that, actually, delayed the decision of building an institution or trying to build an institution. It was something that informed the idea, or the kind of the curiosity about the reception and the stress testing of this notion that people wanted to congregate around ideas and congregate around films through a kind of a magical dimension to that communal experience.
Okay.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So the name afikra, I care a lot about names. Words matter a lot to me, right? So I think when you name things, it means a lot. So I'm curious about the name Cinema Akil, and how quickly you came up with that name, and I want to tie it into this question around Vivienne Westwood, right? In an interview you gave, you said, if Cinema Akil could be a person, it would probably be Vivienne Westwood, or you said something along those lines. Who's this sort of like punk rock icon, fashion designer, or fashion icon. How does the name that you quite literally gave it couple with this personification of what you think it might be?
Look, I think of Cinema Akil as this sort of exquisite corpse, experience. Like, it's something that, evolved over its philosophical kind of questioning and interactions and resistance and and challenges and needs, and it still continues to do that. So I don't really think of it as a fixed thing, although right now it's very much a fixed space, and but even everything that we even our seats are not bolted into the ground, with the exception of a few on the side. So there is this constant consciousness of our temporal identity, of our temporal idea, and we're not ideologically married to a particular way of manifesting what this art house experience looks like. I never set out to build a Movimento or a Babylon or a Film Forum or an Angelica or a Curzon. It was something that was supposed to be informed by the way that people interact with the films that we show, and the space that it presents, and the kinds of conversations that it invites, or actually or it hides, so, or protects in some cases. I mean, the idea of the Vivienne Westwood reference comes from so going back to the name, actually. So Akil, the name Akil is an old Arabic name. It comes from the root of Aql, which is the mindful, al-aql wal-hikmah, the mind, the sort of the mind, or the consciousness, and the wisdom or hikmah, so it kind of became this personification of a fictitious idea. It was, the history of it came from a specific person, and the trajectory of the project being something that was very personal to to my partner at the time, who wanted to build a rooftop cinema in the Dubai World Trade Center, and had a very different idea of of what an art house in Dubai would look like. And this was at the time where that sort of cultural moment that a lot of people reference in July was taking place. So that was, that was kind of the origin story of where that name came from. But there was a kind of a personalization, of the relationship to the name that kind of transcended its history. So it wasn't like we were like, I don't know, Eisenberg's, smoked meat sandwich shop, like it was that, that belonged to a particular person. It was something that became female also, so there was this kind of like moment where we actually, had a very different kind of, realization of what the cinema actually represented. And I think, the Vivienne Westwood reference, and, a host of a lot of other women that kind of informed the persona, the ideals, the kind of the grace, the horror, of the female experience became very rooted in the way that we translated our, programming and the space itself. So you have, you walk into the cinema now, our Mary Magdalene is Sofiko Chiarelli, who stars as the main character in Sergei Parajanov's The Color of Pomegranates, and she kind of is this sort of, saint that we reflect to and pray to, kind of as a, ideologically or mythically or, spiritually speaking. But through the films that we've shown also, like, I think there's this kind of constant need to reinforce, these figures and these, these incredible, people and women that have made, thinking like this possible, that have made conversations like this possible, from Sofiko to Vivienne Westwood to RBG to Grace Jones to Iris Apfel to, Munir Shahroudi Farmayan, which is a documentary showed by Bahman Kiarostami. Advanced Style, the film, became, these were all kind of collections or consortiums of this, aesthetic, this language, this way of being, this spirit that became infused in the kinds of conversations we were having consciously and subconsciously, and became the philosophy without outwardly, crying it as such.
This brings me perfectly to this question that I was dying to ask you. So every email that you send, right, or every thing on the website has these two phrases over and over again, right? For the love of film and follow us into the dark, right? And as I said before, I think about words that are intentionally chosen and repeated a lot. Mantras matter. And for a while I was like, oh, that's a cute, maybe that's a shallow thing, right? This idea of like, oh, walk into the dark cinema, then I realized, of course, it's not only a cute, shallow thing. There must be more depth to it. And then I heard you talk about this idea of a communal communal experience of shared darkness, which is like a beautiful juxtaposition to quite literally the light that shines through film to create cinematic experiences, and that idea of like waking up, right? Like thoughtfulness and the wisdom of being woke, so to speak, but also the cover of darkness, where you can feel feelings and talk about things with some degree of anonymity. How quickly did you, or walk me through, am I way off the mark? Does that sound about right? Are there other things that you're thinking about that I'm not mentioning?
I mean, thank you for speaking to that, and thank you for picking up on all of these different, references and possibilities, right? So a lot of what we do, being situated where we are, and the kind of the range of, of conversations that can take place, that explicitly, tend to have a dimension of deep cute. So I think that's been the art of expression in Dubai. It's how do you tell a very rooted, thoughtful, curious, critical, subliminal, story or thought, through something that appears disarming, and edible. So, Follow Us Into the Dark is this kind of thing that we've been using ever since we started, I think. And it was something that became relevant to us in different ways at different moments. And I think this has been a trend, of the way that we kind of build our, collective, philosophies. And this was conscious. It wasn't I didn't want to have a Bible or a guidebook or, whatever else, spiritual reference you want to pick up on, to build this, to build this institution where we had, the brand guidelines, we had the tagline that referred to particular values, we had the women that personified what we were about. It was never really about that. It was about, what is it that this place becomes? And Follow Us Into the Dark, I mean, there's multiple references that it probably drew from, like all other ideas, from the darkness of, of the shared cinematic experience that I think I probably, plagiarized or, or referred to or was inspired by through an essay or an interview actually by, with Jim Jarmusch, the director, where he talks about, the shared darkness or the experience of shared darkness. There's the darkness that we, hopefully are able to provide, as a small space of, of a cloak of protection or of pretending or of shape-shifting that, that cinema offers. And it's not us doing the work, and it's not us professing to do this. This is the kind of thing that happens when you enter into a space under the surrendering, kind of to the cinematic experience. And there's a song Death Cab by Cutie that, that also uses it as a reference of death. And there's the actual darkness of our, human condition and our experience of, of the things that, that go unsaid, the things that we are fighting against, the demons that we, we invoke. And I think all of these things, packaged neatly into this tagline that you refer to, continue to be true. However silenced or private they may be in, in expressing that, or aphoristically, sharing it.
Yeah, I think it's beautiful. My favorite word in that 5-word phrase is us, which I appreciate. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about your approach to programming and the way you think about your community as a cinema, because most sort of media platforms, they like to talk about community, but I think you guys seem to actually be really intentional about trying to build it and really create a community for yourself. So I think, to me, I get a sense that this programming is programming that you want to watch with your friends, and hopefully the friend group expands by the people who sort of come and put butts in seats. How do you go about thinking about programming? Like, what does a successful program look like to you?
I mean, a successful program is the kind of program that either pushes some sort of boundary and has, like, 1 or 2 people in the audience, or it's the kind of, the kind of program that has a lot of people, jumping on board and getting in line to to see it. So there's different metrics to the kinds of films. So sometimes the success is just being able to actually show a film. Like for me, it's like being able to show I don't know, a film like there's so many, but I am trying to think. Paweł Pawlikowski's Cold War, like with all of its connotations, history, sex scenes, all of that, being able to actually show this film, in this space and and have an audience turn up or not is in itself kind of a testimony to to the kind of space that at least we aspire to to create. And then there's the success of actually like the box office revenue and the numbers and the eyeballs and the butts and seats and all these metrics that we refer to being a theatrically based model. So there isn't I think what we try to do as best as we can is in the art house there's one type of programming, and in the outdoor space there's another type of programming, and in the pop-ups there's a completely different type of thing. So we have like responsive or white label type of experiences and and cinema kind of dialogue films that are trying to shapeshift and enter into spaces where they don't belong, right? So when we do programming at Van Cleef and Arpels School of Jewelry Design pop-up, the kinds of films, like showing a film like Joda Akbar or showing a film like Cleopatra and having a discussion about it are not supposed to happen there. When you show a film like The Wild Blue Yonder or Bjork's Biophilia in the middle of downtown Dubai, with the Burj Khalifa in the background and and all these other consumer based markets, that's trying to do something specific. It's trying to respond to the claims of these spaces and these conversations. What we do at the cinema is try to be more, I guess, widespread. There are different, also considerations that govern the running of a particular space. There's an actual business model that you have to fulfill, and there's these things, and there's also the exclusivity of being able to do releases and newer films and newer titles that are coming out into the circuit that you can't do in other spaces, that are only the domain of having that institutional formal setting and license. So that sometimes, so those are kind of that's the infrastructure on which we build our blocks. Then there's things that we absolutely want to show and have the conversations that we absolutely want to invoke and create. Then there's the value-based decisions that we make in our programming, being non-Eurocentric privileging of content and trying to create to even the playing field of the kind of content that and I think that's actually been if there was one thing that we were successful at doing and bringing to the table, is that we have not been we have failed in presenting any English language feature narrative films. Like, people come to Cinema Akil for non-English language films. So in a way, that's been kind of our contribution, is how do you, even though mainstream cinemas and multiplex cinemas in Dubai are specific, are not necessarily exclusively English. It's Hollywood, Bollywood, Tamil, Malayalam, Egyptian, commercial Egyptian cinema, and a little bit of Korean now coming into the picture. But I'm talking about kind of a exclusively kind of reference point status that the cinema has been able to create through the privileging of that kind of precarious existence of the films that we show and the programs that we show. And then we do kind of like we do our regular, and then there's like obviously a feminist aspect that we try to to maintain throughout the programs that we do. It's not always successful. I mean, when you show a film like the Dolce Vita, it's always this kind of this very kind of difficult conversation to have, and hopefully that it creates it pushes the boundaries of the way that we celebrate films like Fellini's work. And I mean, being also a space for representation, and that's something that was very dear to my heart doing this work, is how come you can watch Anne-Marie Jasser's Salt of the Sea, or later Lamma Shuftak, or later Wajib, or whatever film comes out of the region in France, Italy, New York, London, and you can't you have like Metropolis in Beirut, as the maybe
Okay.
1 week program that shows
So
this film.
I want to talk about Metropolis in Beirut, right? And because you are highly involved with this organization that I showed on the screen earlier, Network of Arab Alternative Screens. For those people who are unaware of what that means, can you just spend like a minute explaining what that organization is, what the mission statement of it is, and how you're involved?
Okay, I'm a very bad steering committee member because I don't know the mission statement by heart.
Or,
But
I mean, actually, it's better that it's not by heart. Just what you think the mission is.
Yeah, so I mean, NAAS is again an iterative, consortium that evolved over multiple exercises. Started out of Arte East as a research project out of Arte East in New York, and then and the aims were to kind of create connections between people and individuals and spaces that were trying to show, call it independent cinema, art house cinema, subversive cinema, alternative cinema, and bringing them together across the Middle East and North African region. And that was the premise on which it started. So at the time, obviously, you had like, less than a handful of spaces, from Metropolis to, which is now no longer, but, is hopefully coming back up. You had Cinémathèque du Tanger, which was, Cinema Rif in Tanja in Morocco. And you had later after that, Cinema Zawiya in Cairo. So, the premise was, how do we connect these practitioners together? How do we create a shared kind of, at least dialogue in a agreed upon, value system of the objective of a physical manifestation of the cinematic experience in an environment that continues to push the physical to the periphery. And that was kind of a lot of the thinking around it. And it still continues to be iterative, which is what I actually, absolutely love about and champion about NAAS, is that it's not just a membership, association. It's, there is a true sense of camaraderie. There is a sense of also acceptance of the specifics and the challenges that exist across our multiple, markets and our multiple audiences and our multiple, political landscapes that unite us but also divide us, and I think that's something that's really rich about that experience. And now we have, I think, last count was 13 members across the region.
So on NAAS, and then I have one last question on NAAS. Do you feel like there is sort of a coagulation of this regional audience? Do you feel like these 13 different screens are kind of speaking to the same in the I forget who said it, this sort of contiguous but divided audience, right? Partitioned but contiguous sea. Does that what it feels like? There is this sort of shared audience from Beirut to Dubai to Cairo to Tunis to Casablanca, all these different places?
Maybe ideologically, because there are kind of certain value systems that, the audiences that gravitate to this kind of critical cinema or, conscious cinema, aware cinema, or, intellectual elitist cinema in some cases, tend to have certain shared, attributes. But I do think every city has its specificity. And I think that's increasingly becoming the case, so there is, you do have, some common denominators of your kind of core audience or like your profile audience, that if you had to create, in the lingo of digital marketing, lookalike audiences between the different spaces, they would probably, exist or mirror each other's, at least, reading lists, interest groups, Facebook likes, and, XYZ, right? And they probably went to the same, world of universities that speak that language and, share that literature and have that core education. But I do think that every city has a completely different, landscape that, sometimes becomes the, the sort of the saving grace, and sometimes become the envy, and sometimes becomes the trap, of these spaces. And that's why, a lot of them don't survive, and while others thrive in different contexts, So now, for example, like a city like, like Tunis, Al Asma, or even, cinemas across Tunisia, as active as the Federation of Cine Clubs of Tunis has been throughout the years, has a very different kind of market and audience base than it did, historically, and compared to the rest of the region, even in terms of engagement with the language of cinema, because of the existence of these cine clubs. So you'll have the same kind of, specifically if we're talking about the art, market, or the sort of, post-colonial, theory, sort of researchers, intellectual, lecturers and so on, and writers that kind of go between these cities and kind of have this pan-regional take on it. But I don't think they're the same people, and I don't think that if we were to create some sort of, like a multiplex sort of model for these art houses, which is kind of what the Everyman model is, or the Curzon model, or the Alamo Draft House in the US model is, it would work necessarily, because you do have to respond to very different needs. And the needs that we respond to, I mean, that's kind of our biggest challenge with NAAS and the NAAS kind of relationship, right? Because our, this conversation is happening in the MENA region, the Arabic speaking, primarily, audience base that this network, speaks to. But, we have a whole other spectrum and dimension of our, demographic reality, our political reality, and our geographic reality that, kind of creates a specificity. So we share experiences, and we share solidarities and the intent. And sometimes actual, like, practical, shared resources of rights, and, and where did you get, this film from, and how much did you pay for this, for this release? But ultimately, like, even the systems are different, and the technologies are different, and the, the sort of the permits are different, and the understanding of cinema is different.
Okay, last question before I do the quick Q&A, and then I'm going to go into the audience questions. So the question is, let's say you go back to 2013, sort of Ghosts of Christmas Past type thing, or Christmas Future, and you speak to Butheina in 2013, 2014, who's hatching a plan for this. And you get to sit down and sort of talk to her and explain to her what she misunderstands about this venture she's about to embark on. What do you tell this person? What does she thoroughly misunderstand about the thing that she's about to start?
Oh, wow. I mean, definitely, an earlier humility around the sort of the uptake of the kinds of films that we would show. A little bit more bravery with the kind of films that we expected to work. And a whole lot of benefit of the doubt and faith in the community. And I think that's something we didn't know, starting out. It was something that was very much based on, okay, we have this pop-up, catch me if you can, we are a disappearing act, we'll come up, we'll do the thing, very much David Blaine, and, and create a moment, and then we're gone. And that was the only kind of metrics that we had to inform the kind of the curiosity and the appetite and the real, like, kind of need or philosophical kind of gravitational pull that something like this represents. It's for some people, it's still like, it's a cute place, I'm going to have a Tinder date there, and it has a really good backdrop, and I seem interesting. And for, like, most other people, it's like, my community sense of identity, nationalism, language, religions, questions, discomforts up on the screen, and all the other questions that you never really thought about. So I think that's the part that I think I continue to be surprised by and humbled by.
So cool. Yeah, that resonates with me with afikra too, because it's similar stories. Okay, cool. Let's do this quick Q&A, and then we'll open it up to everybody else. What are you reading or watching right now? Ideally, I guess either of them. What are you reading or watching right now?
Okay, look, these rapid fire questions turn my brain into some sort of, like, kaleidoscopic pile of, like, iridescent mush, because what are we not watching right now? Like, what are we not reading? What are we, like, not, constantly absorbing? So I have to kind of dwindle it down to, okay, like, what are some things I could remember? Because I feel like I'm constantly in an endless cycle of flipping, skipping, and scrolling. And I wish I was just the cinephile that likes to watch films on 35 millimeter, and that's that, So right now, I mean, everything from doing a, personal Almodovar deep dive So kind of like watching all of his older films when I can. I'm watching Canine Intervention on Netflix because my dog, is central to my life, and I need to understand. And I love that it's focused around people of color. And I watch a lot of screeners of the films that we, have yet to show or want to show or, kind of need to look back on. And obviously endless scrolls of Jean-Paul Zatar and Mariam Benani's Instagram accounts. That's a big part of my, visual consumption.
Perfect. Okay. Who would you love to shadow for a day, past or present?
Oh, I forgot my reading list. So there's Sinan Antoun's Collateral Damage. That's the one film that I want to make if I could just turn a book into a film recently. And Fatima Bhutto's New Kings of the World, which is really important for everybody to read, to kind of think of how the world is going to look like in, 10, 15 years of cinema, Netflix, podcasts, and others. Who would I like to shadow? I mean, there's obviously in the people that are still, with us physically and alive, Tilda Swinton on a tour of her Ballerina Ballroom Cinema of Dreams, which was a project that she launched in 2008, where you could, either, pay £2 or £3 to get a ticket, or you bring fairy cakes as an offering into the space, or Mark Cousins on his 100-day film festival, where Muhammad Ali Talibi's Back of Rice is projected onto Dolly Parton's bedsheet. And I want to share this exercise with everybody here.
Cool. Okay.
And I mean, on a more realistic, note, there's Munir Fahrudi Farman Farmayan, which has kind of become this, guiding, mothership for the work that I've done. And, I love her story. The documentary is absolutely incredible. If you can get your hands on it in any way, make sure you see it. It's produced by Leila Fakhr and directed by Bahman Kiarostami.
Cool. Okay. Real quick. What do people most misunderstand about your work?
The ratio of sexiness to drudgery, I think, is the most common thing, because yes, it's glamorous, it's cinema, it's
98
film,
to 2.
That's
great. My guess.
Pretty much, yeah. Like on the good days, it's like 95, But yeah, there's a lot of grunt work and boring stuff that you have to do, and you're collating ticket sales and stubs, and was the seat reupholstered, and and now in COVID days, it's a whole other story, like running a public space like this. So that but I still live for the sexy. So
that 2%, it goes a long way. Okay.
That's why I'm here, Mikey.
Yeah, I know. I appreciate it. Whose work do you admire or are inspired by? You mentioned a bunch of people, but if you were to sort of give a shout out to somebody that you didn't mention already, and then we'll open it up with Sada in the chat.
I mean, there's a lot of great work being done in multiple spaces that kind of, that inspire me on a daily basis. So I think we're actually experiencing an inspiration overload at this time. But I would say somebody to check out or follow is Roshin Tapuni behind the Shasha Movies or Habibi Collective.
Yeah.
She does great work. So I'm sure she's going to be on an afikra session soon.
Yeah.
And she's asking the right questions and and doing really good work in making sure these films get to the people.
In store together very soon.
Fantastic.
So, yeah. TBA.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Let's open.
Sorry, there's also a shout out I wanted to do to a few. So I've been doing a lot of listening over the past year. And that's been reading, watching, but also listening very deeply. Music, podcasts, everything there is to listen to, audibles. And there's, incredible radio, community radio projects that have come up from Motelacast or Box Out FM in Delhi by DJ Mo City, Hammam Radio, obviously Radio Al-Hara, everybody knows, Foundation.fm, Radio Fluka in some cases. There's a Khartoum podcast that I recently discovered through a friend of mine, the writer Hussam Al-Hilali, Land of the Giants, just because of my kind of, big tech, phobia and curiosity. And sometimes Saturday after dinner for the kind of pulse that it brings.
Cool. That's a good list. Okay, Sada, let's start out with you.
Hi, thank you so much for curating this space today. And Butheina, I love what you've done with Cinema Akil. I'm religiously following how that's going because I love movies and representation matters. I'll make it quick. So my question is, what are some ways or resources to learn about the elements that go into creating this kind of space, particularly in relation to rights and copywriting, and how do you, like, if you wanted to, okay, for example, if I wanted to do this on a small scale, I'm in Kuwait, by the way. So if I wanted to do this on a small scale here, how would I go about rights, and how would I go about curating the space without kind of stepping on any legal toes?
I mean, thank you for your question and for your sentiments about Cinema Akil. And I really I believe in the Kuwait story and the propensity and the kind of the appetite for an art house. So I hope you do that, or do the beginnings of it. There is no real guidebook that exists. I mean, it was something that I learned over time through my work in television, and then through the shared resources that exist with NAAS and other networks that I'm involved in, and just research and a lot of stalking. So depending on what you want to do, there's always like different legal considerations. So if you want to sell tickets, if you want, I mean, you'd have to also check like the kind of the legalities. Unfortunately, Kuwait has become one of those places where, historically it was the most, kind of permissive in terms of the content, and now it's become the most difficult place to show films due to the censorship guidelines. So I think, you just have to figure out the spaces in which you can, I believe in the kind of the work that can be done in the crevices. And if you do just want to create a communal cinema experience rather than build an actual art house, those considerations are a lot looser and and more widely available. I would say definitely don't hesitate to tap into the filmmaking community in Kuwait as the first destination. They will be your biggest allies, and they'll support you showing their films, and they will come out and they'll be there for the films. Obviously, unless they're commercial filmmakers that their end goal is to sell to Netflix for $200,000. But there's a lot of great filmmakers based in Kuwait that you can kind of connect with individually and cultivate those relationships, because that's where the films will come, the audience will come, the credibility will come, and also the knowledge of what this work entails will come. And then there's a technical side of things, which is pretty. There's a variety. So if you follow the Mark Cousins model right now, it's about a bed sheet and a office grade projector, and then there's the Atmos IMAX super duper type of production scale, and communal experience does not require a lot of maintenance or investment.
Okay, great. Ashima?
Ashima, yes. Yes, Ashima, yes.
Great, go for it.
Hi, Butheina. I've just been following Cinema Akil for a while on Instagram, but if I ever visit Dubai, I'd definitely like to drop in.
Where are you?
I'm from India.
Where are you now? Which city?
I'm in a place called Coorg, which is where all the coffee is grown. It's in the south of India.
Yeah.
But I live in Delhi. I think you've already answered both of these questions in a way, but I'll ask anyway. And I'm asking, especially with respect to what the audience was like before and after Cinema Akil came around. So what was the cinema going culture like in Dubai, or the Gulf region before you started Cinema Akil, and how do you think that's changed with you doing what you're doing, and what were some of, or maybe one of the biggest obstacles maybe that you faced with sort of running this platform? Yeah.
Well, thank you for your question, and I'm so happy to whenever I hear somebody is actually following us from the region that we actually think of as our programmatic region, it's amazing. So I mean,
yeah.
The cinema going culture in a nutshell, I mean, like there's no particular kind of unified Gulf cinema experience, because they happened at different times. And I can speak to the Dubai experience, where from the late 60s all the way up to the early the late 80s, it was very much about independently owned, like family owned standalone cinemas of 1,000 seaters, 2 screens that are a lot of them are no longer, and they've been demolished to be replaced by other structures or buildings or hotels and so on. And there's a great essay actually on alsarkal.online by a writer artist called Hind Mizena that kind of traces the history of cinema in Dubai. well, no, actually in the UAE. She looks at also Khorfakan and Sharjah and Abu Dhabi. So that's a really good resource, and it's a 3-part essay. So the first one is up already. And there's another podcast that I recorded a while ago with Kerning Cultures about the Golden Cinema, which was the Plaza Cinema at the time, founded by an Iranian distributor, Indian operator that brought kind of, Bollywood into the city. So there was a lot of that up to the late 80s moment, and then there was the entering of the multiplex. And by the time we opened our cinema, there were the UAE had the highest number of cinema screens in the region per capita. I think it was about like 387 screens across the country, and all of them almost exclusively were pretty much like multiplexes that had 15, 20 screens, almost exclusively dedicated to, with the exception of the festivals, dedicated to big studio commercial films, which there's nothing wrong with, by the way. I mean, when I say that, like, it's not a dig at, I have problematics with a lot of the things that are part of that system and that way of production, but I think there was just there was something that was a gap in the way that we think about films and we engage with films, and there was absolutely, like, with the exception of the festivals. So that was a big part that I forgot to mention. You had the Abu Dhabi Film Festival, the Dubai Film Festival, and the Gulf Film Festival. These were kind of cornerstones of transformation in the way that Dubai and the demographics in Dubai and people that came from the larger region into Dubai for those festivals transformed their understanding of what a regional cinema looked like. Beyond the hoopla, beyond the fireworks, beyond the red carpets and the stars and everything else, the kinds of films that actually were presented at the Dubai Film Festival represented a transformation, and what we believe is newsworthy cinema, is award-worthy cinema, is worthy of celebration. So you had a festival that, celebrated, Reka and, Yusra and, Danny Glover in one space, in addition to the Kiarostamis and the Panahis and the Adrian Brodies and the, you name it. Like, it was a very interesting 14 years that Dubai Film Festival kind of captured, and Abu Dhabi Film Festival. And they unfortunately, all disappeared, and they have been they've been absent for the past 3 years.
Butheina,
so I hope that answers some of your questions.
Let's squeeze in one last really quick question. Yasmin, can you ask the last question real quick?
Yes. Hi, Butheina. So thank you for sharing the story of Cinema with us today. It's pretty clear that it's very much centered on people and the audience. It's not just about the films on their own or kind of in silo. And maybe this is a subjective thing, but the way I see moviegoing is more of a shared solitary experience. It's something that we are doing together, but kind of each person on his own. So how do you create a community around Cinema Akil and the mission of Cinema Akil, either within the form and space of the theater, the dark theater, or maybe outside before and after that?
Thank you, Yasmin, for your question. There's no one way. And I think, the work that's why I love afikra and the work that Mikey's been doing and everybody that's involved is doing, is that, a lot of the, the community, kind of glue and the force that, unites people that are interested in the work that they do is through the conversations. And that is something that, as an institution, we have tried to inject in the work that we do wherever possible, and it's something that we still aspire to. So it's still a kind of a growing experience. In an ideal world, in a different context, every film would be followed by a discussion. Every film would be presented and opened by the filmmaker, and so on. So, and that's the challenges of that are, both resources and, the actual presence of the filmmakers that are, that are working on these films on ground. So Dubai has kind of always been sort of a port or a hub for the kinds of films that we show, but very few of the filmmakers are actually based there. So that's been one of the challenges that we have in terms of creating, conversational engagements with the cinema. But some of the ways that we've tried to do that, and that was something we learned very, I think fundamentally during the lockdown period, which we had to shut down for 3 months between March 13th to June 12th over the 2020 summer, which is shorter compared to a lot of art houses. Whether it's I'm also a sort of a member of the Art House Convergence, and it's a North American network that's equivalent to NAAS, and I can see the kind of difficulties that are being faced by art houses. But I digress. A part of it is this insistence on centering community engagement and community involvement and solidarity, and being out there trying to reach people. And these are not just big words. Everybody likes to talk about community, but ultimately it's about what do you do? What's the first thing that you do when your space is shutting down, when your business is shutting down? Do you try to sell more stuff to people and try to put up streaming alternatives to your films, which no judgment for cinemas that have the option of doing that, have done that? Or do you try and reach out and just say, hey, we're here? And we kind of decided very consciously to take that route and try to create some sort of model by which we would have a conversation with people that miss us, or people that we miss. And we launched a series called Cine Talks, which you can check out on our YouTube page, where we had discussions around films that we could collectively watch and discuss. So I think that's a big part of it, is kind of feeling the pulse and being attuned to what are the conversations on ground, and what are the conversations that are missing. That was actually the invisible, or the unspoken, became the fundamental part of what we were trying to tap into, and what we were addressing. Is what are the things that people are yearning for in Dubai? What are the representations that are rendered invisible through the spaces that exist right now? And I think that being very kind of open and curious, and and constantly, I think, self-critical as an institution, and trying to build that criticality helps with understanding what that actual community looks like. But I'll tell you, it's a struggle consistently. There is no kind of, membership, cult status that we, aspire to or uphold. We represent certain things to certain people at different times. And as long as we continue to do that in different moments, I think that's already, at least important to continue to pursue.
Perfect. Thanks, Yasmin, for the question. Butheina, you are a fountain of wisdom. So this was really, really fun. And thanks everybody who tuned in. I put 2 links in the chat. The first is to give feedback. I'll send them in an email. The second one is to support our work if you're interested in becoming one of our community supporters, to make sure that we can keep on going, keep on growing, keep these events and this community free and open to all. So if you're inspired by this work, please be one of the hundreds of people around the world who are making this stuff happen. And with that, have a good day or night wherever you are. And this conversation will go live on the podcast and on our YouTube channel next week. So you'll be able to go back, watch it again, and catch all the references that Butheina made, and double back and find those films and those authors. Butheina,
thank you, Mikey.
Was this fun?
Thank you. Absolutely, it was a joy, and I'm humbled by by the questions and interest in our work. So if you're ever in Dubai, you have a home waiting for you.